Morality has a price. You've been paying it your entire life. Quietly, obediently, often without realizing the invoice was even being tallied. Every time you swallowed your frustration to keep the peace. Every time you let someone take credit because confrontation felt wrong. Every time you apologized for asking for what you'd earned, as if ambition itself were an offense against decency. That wasn't virtue. That was taxation, a silent levy extracted by systems, people, and social scripts that profit from your compliance while praising your restraint. And here's the brutal irony. Those same systems never applied the same moral accounting to themselves. They bent when necessary. They adapted. They chose effectiveness over purity. Not because they were corrupt, but because they understood something you weren't taught. Morality without strategy is sacrifice without return. This isn't about abandoning your values. It's about refusing to let them be used as chains. Machiavelli didn't write for tyrants. He wrote for those who wanted to build, protect, and endure in a world that rewards results, not intentions. His secret truth, the highest morality, is the one that survives, not the one that collapses under its own idealism. You are raised to believe that goodness guarantees reward, that honesty is always met with reciprocity, that patience will eventually be honored. But look around. Look closely. Who actually thrives under those rules? Who gets promoted, respected, listened to, followed? Not because they're the most virtuous, but because they understand the hidden mechanics of human interaction. Not the person who never bends, but the one who knows when to yield and when to stand firm. Not the one who speaks only truth, but the one who delivers it in ways others can receive. Not the martyr who burns quietly for the cause, but the architect who builds structures where the cause can flourish. There's a reason history remembers rulers, not saints. Not because power is evil, but because influence is the currency of change. And if you refuse to learn its language, you surrender your ability to shape anything beyond your own suffering. Let's be clear. This isn't permission to become cruel. It's an invitation to become complete, to stop letting your ethics be weaponized against you, to realize that being good doesn't mean being predictable, passive, or powerless. Real integrity isn't rigid. It's resilient. It doesn't break under pressure. It adapts without betrayal. Think of the last time you compromised your needs to avoid conflict. Maybe it was at work, letting a colleague interrupt you again because it's not worth the drama. Or in a relationship, swallowing resentment because love means putting others first. Or even internally, silencing your ambition because wanting more feels selfish. In each case, you told yourself you were choosing kindness, but what you were really choosing was invisibility. You trained people that your boundaries were negotiable, that your voice was optional, that your value could be discounted without consequence. And they learned, not out of malice, but out of human nature. People respond to signals. If you signal that your time, energy, and ideas have no cost, they'll treat them as free resources, not because they're bad people, but because you never taught them otherwise. Machiavelli observed that men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. The deception isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's just the quiet lie we tell ourselves, that playing small keeps us safe, that avoiding tension preserves harmony, that self-sacrifice earns respect. But safety without agency is captivity. Harmony without equity is oppression. Respect without influence is pity. The cost of your morality isn't measured in guilt or shame. It's measured in lost opportunities, silenced contributions, and unrealized potential. Every time you chose the right thing over the effective thing, You didn't just lose a battle. You surrendered territory in the war for your own significance. And the tragedy? You probably thought you were being noble. You weren't. You were being naive, not because you believed in goodness, but because you believed goodness alone could navigate complexity. The world doesn't punish morality. It punishes simplicity. It doesn't reject ethics. It rejects inflexibility. The truly moral person isn't the one who follows every rule. It's the one who ensures their values create actual impact, who understands that sometimes protecting your mission requires protecting your position first, who knows that forgiveness without boundaries enables repeat harm, that transparency without timing creates unnecessary damage, that kindness without discernment becomes complicity. This is where Machiavelli's secret lies, not in the shadows of manipulation, but in the light of strategic stewardship. He didn't advocate cruelty. He advocated clarity. He didn't glorify deceit. He exposed illusion. His genius was recognizing that principles must be paired with perception, or they become ornaments on a sinking ship. Consider the leader who tells hard truths gently, not to deceive, but to ensure they're heard. The parent who sets firm limits with love, not to control, but to cultivate responsibility. The innovator who times their disruption, not to manipulate, but to maximize adoption. These aren't compromises, they're completions. They're the integration of heart and mind, values and velocity. You've been conditioned to see adaptability as betrayal, to equate consistency with character, to believe that changing your approach means losing your soul. But that's the oldest trick in the book, convincing the capable that their flexibility is weakness, so they remain manageable. The strongest trees don't resist the wind. They bend without breaking. The wisest leaders don't cling to dogma. They serve their mission through method. Your morality isn't diminished by strategy. It's amplified by it, because now your goodness isn't just a private virtue. It's a public force, a lever, a catalyst, a structure through which real change flows. So ask yourself, what has your morality cost you? What relationships have you damaged by refusing to set boundaries? What careers have you stalled by avoiding necessary conflict? What innovations have died inside you because you feared being seen as too ambitious? The bill is due, not to repay some cosmic debt, but to reclaim what was taken through misapplied virtue. Machiavelli's secret truth isn't that you should abandon morality. It's that you must arm it, equip it, teach it to move through the world without apology or self-sabotage, because the alternative isn't purity, it's irrelevance, and the world doesn't need more martyrs. It needs more architects, more builders, more stewards who understand that the highest form of ethics isn't suffering silently. It's shaping systems where suffering becomes unnecessary. That begins with you. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now, with the recognition that your goodness has been exploited, and the decision that it won't be again. Not through cynicism, not through hardness, but through wisdom, through the quiet, unshakable understanding that true morality isn't measured by how perfectly you follow rules, but by how effectively you turn your values into victories. For yourself, for others, for the causes that matter. The cost of your morality has been too high. It's time to renegotiate the terms. You think you're being noble when you stay silent. But silence isn't virtue. It's vacancy, a space where others write their agendas over your potential. You've been taught that restraint is righteousness, that patience is piety, that swallowing your truth preserves peace. But peace without power is surrender dressed as serenity. And you've been surrendering for years, not to enemies but to illusions. The illusion that goodness guarantees protection, that fairness is inherent in systems, that if you just wait long enough, the world will recognize your worth and reward it accordingly. It won't. Not because the world is cruel, but because it is indifferent. Indifferent to your intentions, indifferent to your sacrifices, indifferent to the quiet martyrdom you've mistaken for moral superiority. Machiavelli didn't warn against morality. He warned against naivety. He saw what you're only beginning to see, that principles unanchored by perception are like ships without rudders, noble in design, useless in storm. And make no mistake, you are in a storm, not of violence or chaos, but of subtle currents, social expectations that demand your compliance, psychological patterns that exploit your predictability, invisible hierarchies that reward those who understand influence while praising those who refuse to wield it. You are raised on fables, stories where the honest win, the patient are rewarded, the meek inherit. But reality writes different endings. The honest get passed over, the patient get buried under louder voices. The meek, they inherit nothing but the echo of their own unspoken needs. This isn't pessimism, it's pattern recognition. Look at any domain where real change occurs. Business, politics, art, even relationships. And you'll find the same truth. Impact belongs to those who understand human nature, not those who wish it were different. The innovator who times their launch perfectly doesn't cheat. They respect the rhythm of attention. The leader who frames hard truths with empathy doesn't manipulate. They honor the psychology of reception. The artist who markets their work strategically doesn't sell out. They ensure their vision reaches eyes that need it. These aren't betrayals of integrity. They are expressions of intelligence. And intelligence properly applied is the highest form of ethics, because it ensures your values don't die in obscurity. You've been conditioned to equate consistency with character, to believe that changing your approach means losing your soul. But that's the trap. The quiet sabotage disguised as moral purity. Real character isn't rigid. It's responsive. It doesn't fracture under pressure. It adapts without apology. Think of water. It doesn't fight the container. It fills it, takes its shape, flows around obstacles, and yet nothing carves mountains like water. Nothing sustains life like water. Nothing cleanses, nourishes, transforms like water. Your morality should be water, not stone. Stone breaks. Water endures. Stone is predictable. Water is powerful. Stone gets stepped on. Water shapes the earth. Machiavelli understood this. He didn't worship force. He worshipped effectiveness, not for its own sake, but because only through effectiveness can ideals survive contact with reality. You want to build something beautiful? Then learn how structures stand. You want to protect something sacred? Then learn how boundaries hold. You want to spread something true? Then learn how messages land. This isn't compromise, it's completion. You've spent years believing that strategy corrupts morality. But what if the opposite is true? What if morality without strategy is corruption by default, allowing harmful systems to persist because you refuse to engage with their mechanics? Every time you chose the right thing over the effective thing, you didn't uphold virtue. You abandoned responsibility. Responsibility to your mission, to your people, to the future you claim to care about, because ideas don't change the world. Execution does. Values don't shift culture. Influence does. Goodness doesn't heal systems. Power does. And power, rightly stewarded, is the most moral tool you possess. Not the power to dominate. The power to direct, to channel, to build, to protect, to amplify. You fear power because you've seen it abused. But abstinence isn't the answer. Mastery is. The surgeon doesn't refuse the scalpel because it can cut. The musician doesn't avoid the instrument because it can screech. The architect doesn't reject the blueprint because it can be misused. They learn. They train. They wield with precision. So must you. Your morality is too precious to leave defenseless, too vital to remain naive, too necessary to be sidelined by your own refusal to engage with how the world actually works. Let's dismantle the myth. Strategic thinking isn't the enemy of ethics. It's their guardian. Without it, your values become decorative, admired in theory, ignored in practice. With it, they become catalytic, shaping decisions, altering outcomes, redirecting trajectories. Consider the activist who learns to speak the language of policymakers, not to dilute their message, but to ensure it's heard where laws are made. The teacher who adapts their methods to reach resistant students, not to lower standards, but to raise possibility. The parent who sets consequences with love, not to control, but to cultivate resilience. These aren't compromises, they're completions, integrations, evolutions. You've been sold a false binary. Be good or be effective. Choose kindness or choose power. Serve others or serve yourself. But that's child's logic, useful for fairy tales, catastrophic for real life. The adult truth: kindness without power is performative. Power without kindness is predatory. But power guided by kindness? That's legacy. That's transformation. That's the secret Machiavelli whispered across centuries. Not to tyrants, but to builders, to protectors, to those willing to do the hard, nuanced work of making goodness matter in a complex world. You've paid enough. Paid in missed promotions, stolen ideas, eroded confidence, silenced voice. Paid in relationships where your needs were footnotes. In careers where your contributions were background noise. In dreams deferred because now isn't the right time. The invoice is due. Not to settle some karmic debt, but to reclaim your agency. To stop letting your morality be used as a leash. To realize that the highest form of ethics isn't suffering in silence. It's designing systems where silence becomes unnecessary. That begins with perception, with seeing clearly, not cynically, but strategically. Seeing that people respond to signals, not wishes. That systems reward behaviors, not intentions. That influence flows to those who understand its currents, not those who curse them from the shore. You don't have to become someone else. You have to become more of yourself. The part that knows when to speak, when to wait, when to yield, when to stand. The part that understands timing isn't trickery. It's respect for context. That framing isn't fraud. It's stewardship of attention. That boundaries aren't barriers. They're the architecture of sustainable contribution. Machiavelli's secret wasn't darkness. It was discernment. The ability to see the game for what it is. Not to cheat, but to play well enough that your values win. Not by accident, not by hope, but by design. And design requires study, requires practice, requires the humility to admit that wanting good things isn't enough. You must learn how to make them real. That's not betrayal. That's maturity. That's the moment morality graduates from sentiment to strategy and becomes unstoppable. You're ready, not because you're angry, though you should be, not because you're tired, though you are, but because you finally see the cost, and you refuse to pay it any longer, not with bitterness, not with hardness, but with wisdom, with precision, with the quiet, unshakable resolve of someone who has stopped apologizing for wanting their goodness to matter, and started learning how to make it undeniable. You've been lied to, not with malice, but with convenience. Told that morality is static, that integrity means unwavering consistency, that changing your approach betrays your soul. But here's the truth, they never whispered. Rigidity isn't righteousness. It's fragility dressed as virtue. And fragility breaks every time, under pressure, under complexity, under the weight of a world that doesn't pause for purity. You think you're being principled when you refuse to adapt, but principles untempered by perception are like glass sculptures in a hurricane, beautiful until they shatter. Machiavelli didn't write for the rigid. He wrote for the resilient, for those who understood that survival isn't surrender, it's stewardship, that protecting your mission sometimes means protecting your position first. That influence, rightly wielded, is the most moral tool you possess, because without it, your values remain whispers in a storm. Look at your life. Really look. Where have you mistaken inflexibility for integrity? Where have you equated suffering with sanctity? Where have you silenced your needs, diluted your voice, minimized your ambition, all in the name of being good? And what did it cost you? Not abstractly, specifically. The promotion you didn't fight for because it'll work out. The relationship where you swallowed resentment because love means sacrifice. The idea you didn't pitch because they won't listen anyway. Each one a silent surrender, not to evil, but to illusion. The illusion that goodness guarantees outcome, that fairness is inherent, that patience is rewarded. It isn't. Not because the universe is cruel, but because human systems are designed by humans. Flawed, self-interested, context-driven humans who respond to signals, not sermons. You signal availability. You become everyone's resource. You signal passivity. You become everyone's doormat. You signal self-doubt. You become everyone's afterthought. Not because people are bad, because they're adaptive. They read the room, they follow energy, they invest in certainty. And you've been broadcasting uncertainty wrapped in virtue, and wondering why no one builds with you. Machiavelli saw this 5 centuries ago. He watched idealists collapse under their own dogma while pragmatists shaped empires. Not because pragmatism was superior, but because it was functional, because it understood timing, psychology, leverage, not to manipulate, to manifest, to turn vision into structure, to turn values into velocity. You want to change the world? Then stop waiting for permission. Stop apologizing for ambition. Stop equating loudness with vulgarity and quietness with depth. Depth matters, but only if it's heard, only if it's felt, only if it's given space to reshape reality. And space isn't granted, it's claimed, not through aggression, through presence, through the quiet, unshakable understanding that your contribution deserves oxygen, and you won't suffocate it anymore to make others comfortable. This isn't ego, it's ecology. A healthy system requires boundaries, requires balance, requires participants who understand that mutual respect isn't automatic. It's negotiated, cultivated, protected. You've been negotiating from weakness, not because you lack strength, but because you were taught that asserting your value is selfish, that protecting your energy is stingy, that demanding reciprocity is transactional. But relationships without reciprocity aren't sacred. They're extractive, Careers without boundaries aren't noble, they're exploitative. Movements without strategy aren't pure, they're performative. Real integrity isn't refusing to play the game. It's learning to play it well enough that your values win. Not by accident, not by hope, by design. Design requires discernment. Discernment requires detachment, not from your values, but from the childish belief that they'll be honored simply because they exist. They won't. Not unless you build structures that enforce them. Not unless you develop influence that amplifies them. Not unless you master the mechanics of attention, timing, and human nature. Not to deceive, but to deliver. Think of the greatest changemakers in history, not the martyrs, but the architects. Did they succeed by being rigid or by being responsive? Did they cling to dogma or adapt methods to maximize impact? Gandhi didn't fast to punish. He fasted to focus attention. Mandela didn't forgive to forget. He forgave to reframe a nation. MLK didn't speak only truth. He spoke truth in rhythms that moved masses. These weren't compromises, they were completions, strategic expressions of deep morality, not despite their sophistication, but because of it. You've been sold a myth that purity equals power, that simplicity equals strength, that if you just be yourself, the world will align. It won't. Not because you're unworthy, but because yourself is incomplete until it learns how to navigate complexity without corrosion, until it understands that authenticity isn't sameness, it's alignment. Alignment between your values and your methods, between your intentions and your impact, between your heart and your hands. Machiavelli's secret wasn't darkness, it was dexterity, the ability to hold multiple truths at once, that people are both noble and self-interested, that systems are both malleable and resistant, that timing is both art and science. He didn't abandon morality, he armored it, gave it teeth, gave it legs, gave it the ability to walk into rooms where decisions are made and leave with outcomes that matter. You can do the same, not by becoming someone else, by becoming more of yourself. The part that knows when to speak softly and carry influence. The part that understands silence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's cowardice disguised as patience. The part that realizes forgiveness without boundaries isn't grace. It's permission to repeat harm. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Clarity that the highest form of ethics isn't suffering silently. It's designing systems where silence becomes unnecessary. That begins with you, with the decision that your morality is too precious to leave defenseless, too vital to remain naive, too necessary to be sidelined by your own refusal to engage with how influence actually flows. You've paid enough. Paid in eroded confidence, in stolen ideas, in promotions given to louder, less qualified voices, in relationships where your needs were footnotes, in dreams deferred because now isn't the right time. The invoice is due, not to settle some karmic debt, but to reclaim your agency, to stop letting your goodness be used as a leash, to realize that true power isn't domination, it's direction, the power to channel resources toward your mission, to amplify voices that need hearing, to protect spaces where vulnerability can thrive, not because you demand it, but because you've built the architecture for it. That's legacy, that's transformation, that's the secret Machiavelli whispered, not to tyrants, but to stewards, to those willing to do the nuanced, uncomfortable work of making goodness matter in a complex world. You're ready, Not because you're angry, though you should be. Not because you're tired, though you are. But because you finally see the cost, and you refuse to pay it any longer. Not with bitterness, not with hardness, but with precision, with wisdom, with the quiet, unshakable resolve of someone who has stopped apologizing for wanting their values to shape reality and started learning how to make them undeniable. The world doesn't need more saints. It needs more strategists with souls, more builders with boundaries, more leaders who understand that the highest morality isn't avoiding the game. It's changing the rules so more people can win. That's your invitation. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now, with the recognition that your goodness has been exploited, and the decision that it won't be again. Not through force, not through fraud, but through fluency. Fluency in human nature, in timing, in influence, in the quiet, devastating power of strategic integrity. You were never meant to be a martyr. You were meant to be a maker, a mover, a shaper. And the tools you need aren't hidden. They're waiting for you to stop fearing them. Start studying them. Start wielding them. Not for ego, but for evolution. For yourself, for others, for the future you claim to care about. The cost of your morality has been too high. It's time to renegotiate, not by abandoning your values, but by arming them, equipping them, teaching them to move through the world without apology or self-sabotage, because the alternative isn't purity, it's irrelevance. And you were born for more than that.